Welcome to my YouTube channel, Heardbreak Chronicles, a place where you will hear a large number of fascinating and intriguing chronicles about hearts that are completely broken by female betrayal. Let's not drag on for long. Let's get straight to the point. The truth has a strange way of sneaking up on you when you least expect it. One moment, life feels ordinary, predictable even, and in the next, everything you thought you knew collapses like a house of cards. For me, that moment came on an otherwise quiet Thursday evening, sitting in my living room while my wife, Sarah, was in the shower. It started with something so small, I almost ignored it. A message notification on her phone. I've never been the kind of man to snoop. Sarah and I had been married for 10 years, and trust had always been the foundation of our relationship, or so I thought. But something about that message caught my attention. Her phone lit up on the coffee table in front of me, displaying a preview of the text. "See you at the cottage at 9. Can't wait. Red heart." A name appeared at the top, Tom. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the screen, waiting for it to turn off again, as if maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But there it was, clear as day. At first, I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe it was a joke or just a friend being playful. But the heart emoji, that didn't sit right with me. And what cottage were they talking about? We didn't have a cottage, or at least I didn't know about one. The shower was still running upstairs. I hesitated for a moment, my pulse quickening, and then I did something I'd never done before. I picked up her phone and unlocked it. The message thread was right there. I scrolled up, my hands shaking. The texts left no room for doubt. "Can't wait to see you tonight." One of them read. Another said, "Last night was amazing. I can still feel your touch." My stomach turned. The longer I read, the worse it got. This wasn't just a flirtation. It was a full-blown affair, and it had been going on for months. They had pet names for each other. They talked about secret meetups and shared inside jokes that I couldn't begin to understand. And now they were planning to meet that very night, at some cottage I had never heard of. I dropped the phone back onto the table like it had burned me. My mind raced. I could confront her right then and there, but a darker part of me wanted proof. Real, undeniable proof. If I stormed in now, she'd deny everything or twist the story. But if I caught them in the act, there'd be no way out. I grabbed my car keys and left the house without saying a word. The drive felt like a blur. My hands clenched the steering wheel, my thoughts spiraling. I kept replaying the messages in my head, every word cutting deeper than the last. How long has this been going on? Why would she do this to me? Who the hell is Tom? I reached the cottage just after 9 p.m. It was tucked away at the edge of a wooded area, almost hidden from the road. The driveway was empty, but the front door stood slightly ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. I killed the engine and stepped out, my heart pounding in my chest. The night was unnervingly quiet, too quiet. I expected to hear voices, maybe laughter, but all I heard was the sound of my own footsteps crunching on the gravel. The inside of the cottage was dark, save for a faint light coming from the living room. The scene before me sent a chill down my spine. The room was in disarray. Chairs overturned, a lamp shattered on the floor, and a dark stain on the carpet that looked suspiciously like blood. I called out, my voice trembling. "Sarah? Tom?" No response. I moved cautiously through the house, my senses on high alert. In the kitchen, I found a phone sitting on the counter. It wasn't Sarah's, it was Tom's. The screen was still lit, displaying a half-written text. "He knows. You need to get out now." A wave of nausea hit me. My mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened. There were signs of a struggle, scuff marks on the floor, a chair lying on its side, but no sign of either of them. Then I noticed the footprints. They led from the living room to the back door and out into the woods. I followed them as far as I could until they disappeared into the darkness. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but I had to know what had happened. I retraced my steps to the cottage and locked the door behind me. I tried calling Sarah's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. My hands were shaking as I dialed again, and again with no answer. Hours passed. I sat in the living room, staring at the wreckage around me, my mind cycling through every worst-case scenario. Had they run off together? Had something more sinister happened? At around midnight, flashing red and blue lights lit up the front yard. 2 police officers stepped inside, their eyes scanning the scene. "Jack Walker?" one of them asked. I nodded, my throat dry. "We received an anonymous tip about a disturbance at this address. Can you tell us what happened here?" I tried to explain about the text messages, the affair, the strange state of the house, but the more I talked, the more skeptical they seemed. "And where are Sarah and Tom now?" the officer asked, raising an eyebrow. I don't know," I stammered. "They were gone when I got here." The second officer exchanged a glance with his partner. "Mr. Walker, I think you'd better come with us." Just like that, I found myself in the back of a squad car, with the weight of suspicion hanging heavy in the air. "Mr. Walker?" the detective said as we arrived at the station, folding his arms across his chest. "Care to explain why you were the last person seen at the scene of Tom Hargrove's disappearance? They say your life can change in a heartbeat." For me, that moment was sitting in a cold, fluorescent-lit interrogation room at the local police station. My heart was still racing from what I'd found at the cottage. Tom was missing, Sarah was nowhere to be found, and somehow, I was the one under suspicion. The detective across from me, a grizzled man named Detective Harris, leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against the table. His eyes never left mine, studying every twitch, every hesitation. "Let's start again, Jack," he said, his voice calm but full of quiet authority. "You expect me to believe you just happened to show up at the cottage after finding those messages on your wife's phone, and you found the place trashed with no sign of Sarah or Tom?" "That's exactly what happened," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I didn't touch anything. I didn't know what else to do." "Aha," Harris said, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "Funny thing is, Tom Hargrove's car is still missing. And you have no idea where your wife is, right?" I nodded. "I've been trying to call her, but her phone keeps going to voicemail." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Do you know how this looks, Jack? Your wife's lover is missing. There's evidence of a struggle, and you're the only one at the scene. Doesn't paint a very pretty picture, does it?" I felt a lump rising in my throat. "I didn't do anything," I said, my voice cracking. "I just want to find Sarah." Harris studied me for a moment before standing up. "We're going to keep you here for a while, Jack. In the meantime, why don't you think real hard about what else you might remember?" He left the room, and I sat there in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on me. My mind raced, replaying the events of the night over and over again. Something wasn't adding up. If there had been a struggle, where was Sarah? Why had Tom's phone been left behind, but not hers? Hours passed before Harris returned. This time he wasn't alone. A second officer, Detective Miller, followed him inside and placed a folder on the table in front of me. "Jack," Miller began, her tone softer than Harris's. "We're trying to help you, but we need you to be honest with us. Is there anything you're not telling us about what happened at the cottage?" I shook my head. "I've told you everything I know. I went there to confront them. When I got there, they were already gone." Miller opened the folder and slid a photograph across the table. It showed the dark stain on the carpet at the cottage, a close-up that made my stomach turn all over again. "Preliminary analysis suggests it's blood," she said. "We're running tests to confirm whose it is. But Jack, if it's Tom's, things are going to get a lot more serious for you." A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. "You think I hurt him?" "We're not saying that," Harris interjected. "Not yet, but we have to explore every possibility." I felt trapped. They weren't just exploring possibilities. They were circling me like sharks. The worst part? I couldn't even blame them. I knew how it looked. "I want a lawyer," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Harris nodded, his expression unreadable. "That's your right. We'll get you one." They left me alone again, and the room felt even colder than before. My thoughts spiraled into a dark abyss of fear and confusion. What if they pin this on me? What if I never find out what really happened to Sarah? The lawyer and the next step. My lawyer, David Mitchell, arrived an hour later. He was a sharp, no-nonsense kind of guy with a steely confidence that gave me a sliver of hope. "They've got nothing on you," he said after reviewing the case. "Circumstantial evidence at best. But you did the right thing by calling me. Don't say another word without me present." Mitchell was right. The police had no direct evidence linking me to any crime. But that didn't stop them from keeping a close eye on me. After a few more hours of questioning, they finally let me go. I drove home in a daze, my mind swirling with unanswered questions. My house felt empty and cold, every room a painful reminder of Sarah's absence. Her clothes were still hanging in the closet. Her favorite coffee mug sat on the counter. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. If the police weren't going to find her, I would. I started with Tom. I didn't know much about him, but I had his phone. I carefully scrolled through his messages and contacts, searching for any clues. One number stood out. A string of recent calls to someone named KL. I clicked on it, my heart pounding. The number wasn't saved in Sarah's phone, which meant it was someone she didn't want me to know about. I typed the number into a reverse phone lookup site, and after a few seconds, a name appeared on the screen. Kevin Langford. The name didn't mean anything to me at first, but then I saw his address. It was less than a mile from the cottage. A risky decision. I knew it was a bad idea, but I couldn't stop myself. I grabbed my keys and headed out into the night, determined to get answers. Kevin's house was dark when I pulled up. I parked a few houses down and watched from a distance, my pulse quickening. After a few minutes, a light flickered on in the upstairs window. I got out of the car, my breath visible in the cold air. My footsteps crunched on the gravel as I made my way to the front door. I raised my hand to knock, but before I could, the door swung open. A man stood in the doorway, his eyes wide with surprise, and something else I couldn't quite place. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice cautious. "Kevin Langford?" I said. He nodded slowly. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice firm. "It's about Tom Hargrove and my wife, Sarah." For a split second, I saw something flicker across his face. Fear, maybe, or recognition. Then he stepped aside and motioned for me to come in. "You'd better tell me everything," he said, closing the door behind me. Kevin Langford's house was dimly lit, the shadows in the corners making the place feel colder than it should have. His eyes darted around nervously as he closed the door behind me, locking it with a soft click. There was something off about him, a tension in his body that set my instincts on edge. "All right," Kevin said, folding his arms across his chest. "Why don't you start from the beginning? What's this about Tom and your wife?" I didn't trust him, not fully, but I had no choice. If there was any chance he knew where Sarah was or what had happened at the cottage, I had to take it. "I found messages on my wife's phone," I began. "They were planning to meet at the cottage last night. When I got there, the place was wrecked. Tom was gone, and now the police think I had something to do with it." Kevin didn't react right away. He just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he shook his head. "Tom's in deep trouble," he muttered, almost to himself. "What kind of trouble?" I pressed, leaning closer. Kevin hesitated, then walked over to a small table in the corner of the room. He opened a drawer and pulled out a folder stuffed with papers. He handed it to me, his eyes dark with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe, or regret. "Tom's not just some guy," Kevin said. "He's involved in things. Bad things. He's been in over his head for a while now, and if you're tangled up in this, you'd better watch your back." I opened the folder, my heart racing. The papers were a mix of bank statements, photographs, and emails, all of them pointing to something much bigger than an affair. "Wait," I said, flipping through the pages. "These are money transfers, offshore accounts. What is this?" "Tom was laundering money," Kevin explained. "I don't know all the details, but he was working with some dangerous people. People who don't take kindly to betrayal." A chill ran down my spine. This was more than I'd bargained for. Suddenly, Tom's disappearance made a lot more sense. "You're saying he staged all of this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "The struggle at the cottage, The text message on his phone? It was all a setup? Kevin nodded. If the police are looking at you, it's because Tom wanted them to. He needed a fall guy, and you were the perfect target. Angry husband, betrayed by his wife. The story practically writes itself. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. All this time, I thought I was chasing the truth about Sarah's affair, but now it seemed like I'd stumbled into something far more dangerous. What about Sarah? I asked, my voice cracking. Where is she? Kevin's face darkened. I don't know, he admitted. But if Tom dragged her into this, she could be in serious trouble. I clenched my fists, rage and fear swirling in my chest. We have to find her. We have to stop him. Kevin sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. You're not the only one looking for him, Jack. The people he's running from, they're not going to ask questions. If they find him or your wife, before we do, it won't end well. A dangerous alliance. Despite my gut telling me to walk away, I knew I couldn't. Sarah was still out there, and if Kevin was right, she was in way over her head. All right, I said, meeting Kevin's gaze. We're going to find him, but we do it my way. Kevin nodded, though I could tell he wasn't thrilled about it. We'll start with his last known location. If he's on the run, he'll need cash and a place to lay low. We spent the next few hours digging through Tom's phone and the folder Kevin had given me. There were dozens of contacts, most of them with cryptic notes next to their names. Clearly people involved in whatever shady business Tom had been running. One name stood out. R. Whitaker, Safe House. Who's Whitaker? I asked, pointing to the name. Kevin frowned. I've heard the name before. He's a fixer. Someone who helps guys like Tom disappear when things get too hot. If Tom's hiding, Whitaker would know where he is. My pulse quickened. Then that's where we go next. The safe house. The drive to Whitaker's address was tense. Every mile felt like an eternity, my mind racing with possibilities. Was Sarah there? Was Tom? What if we were walking into a trap? The address led us to an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. The windows were dark, the building surrounded by overgrown weeds and rusting fences. Kevin pulled the car to a stop, his eyes scanning the area. This is it, he said. Be careful. We approached the door cautiously, our footsteps echoing in the empty lot. I knocked twice, my heart pounding in my chest. A few seconds later, the door creaked open, revealing a man in his 60s with sharp eyes and a grizzled beard. Whitaker? I asked. He nodded slowly. Who's asking? We're looking for Tom Hargrove, I said, keeping my voice steady. We know he came to you. Whitaker's eyes narrowed. And why would I tell you that? Because his life and my wife's life depends on it, I said. Please, just tell us where he is. Whitaker studied me for a moment, then stepped aside. Come in. The truth unfolds. Inside the warehouse, Whitaker led us to a small office cluttered with papers and maps. He poured himself a drink and leaned against the desk, his eyes never leaving us. Tom was here, he said finally. Came through about 2 days ago, asking for a way out of the country. Said he was in trouble, but he didn't give me details. And Sarah? I asked desperately. Was she with him? Whitaker shook his head. Didn't see her, but he did say something strange. He mentioned that things had gotten messy at the cottage and that he needed to clean it up. Sounded like he was tying up loose ends. My blood ran cold. Tying up loose ends. We have to find him, I said, my voice shaking. Whitaker nodded. If I were you, I'd start with the docks. He's probably trying to get on a ship out of here. But be careful. If he knows you're coming, he won't hesitate to take you out. The drive to the docks felt like a fever dream, every second stretching into eternity. My thoughts spiraled out of control as I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. Somewhere out there, Tom was trying to disappear, leaving behind chaos and shattered lives. If Whitaker was right, this was my last chance to stop him, and to find out what had really happened to Sarah. Kevin sat in the passenger seat, unusually quiet. His eyes flicked between the road and his phone, scanning for updates. Neither of us spoke. We both knew what was at stake. The docks were dark and desolate, the salty breeze cutting through the night air. Rows of rusting shipping containers stood like silent sentinels, casting long shadows under the dim security lights. Somewhere in this labyrinth of steel and shadows, Tom was waiting. I parked the car a few blocks away, and we approached on foot, our footsteps barely audible on the gravel. Every sound, every creak, every distant clatter, felt amplified in the heavy silence. "Stick close," I whispered to Kevin. "We can't let him slip away." Kevin nodded, his expression tense. "If he's here, he's not going to go quietly." We moved deeper into the maze of containers, my heart pounding harder with every step. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow darting between two containers. "There," I whispered, pointing. We gave chase, weaving through the narrow alleys between the containers. My lungs burned, but I didn't slow down. Tom was just ahead of us, his footsteps echoing in the dark. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice carrying through the empty docks. Tom didn't stop. He rounded a corner, disappearing behind a stack of crates. I pushed myself harder, closing the distance. When I turned the corner, he was there, standing at the edge of the dock, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the cold wind whipping around us. "Tom," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. "It's over. You can't run from this." Tom's eyes flicked between me and the dark waters behind him. His face was pale, his eyes wild. He looked like a man on the edge of losing everything, and in a way he was. "I didn't have a choice," Tom said, his voice shaking. "You don't understand what they were going to do to me." "Then tell me," I said, taking a cautious step closer. "What happened at the cottage? Where's Sarah?" Tom hesitated. His eyes filled with something I hadn't expected, fear. "They were going to kill me," he said. "The people I was working for. They found out I'd been skimming money. They sent someone to take care of it." Panicked. "I needed a way out, fast. So I set you up. I figured if the cops thought you'd done something to me, they'd stop looking for me long enough for me to disappear." My blood ran cold. "And Sarah? Where is she?" Tom's face darkened. "I thought she was with you." My stomach twisted. Sarah wasn't with Tom. Then where was she? "I didn't hurt her," Tom said quickly, as if reading my thoughts. "I swear. The last time I saw her was at the cottage. She was trying to stop me from leaving. Things got messy, but she was fine when I left." I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to punch him right then and there. "You left her there? Alone?" Tom nodded, his eyes darting nervously toward the shadows. "I didn't have a choice. They were coming for me. I had to go." Before I could say another word, a loud crack echoed through the night. Tom's eyes widened in shock, and for a split second, I thought he'd been shot. But then I saw what had happened. One of the crates had been pushed over, blocking the path behind us. Footsteps echoed from the darkness, and a group of men emerged, their faces hidden in the shadows. Well, one of them said, his voice cold and menacing. "Looks like we found our runaway." Tom froze, his breath hitching. "Please," he begged, his voice trembling. "I can fix this. I just need more time." The leader of the group smirked. "Time's up, Tom." I stepped in front of him, my pulse racing. "Wait, you don't have to do this. Whatever he owes you, we can figure it out." The man chuckled. "Sorry, but this isn't a negotiation." Before I could react, one of the men lunged at Tom, grabbing him by the collar. Tom struggled, but it was no use. "Let him go," I shouted, but the men ignored me. Kevin grabbed my arm. "We have to get out of here," he whispered urgently. "We can't take them on." I wanted to fight, but Kevin was right. There were too many of them, and we were unarmed. I had no choice but to retreat, my heart breaking as I watched them drag Tom away. The search for Sarah. Back at the car, I slammed my fists on the steering wheel, my chest heaving with frustration. "They're going to kill him," I said, my voice shaking. "And we still don't know where Sarah is." Kevin pulled out his phone and started typing furiously. "We'll find her," he said. Tom might be gone, but we still have the contacts from his phone. Someone has to know where she is. I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. We were running out of time, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to stop until I found her, no matter what it took. The ride back from the docks was a blur of thoughts and fears. Kevin sat silently beside me, his face lit by the dim glow of his phone as he scrolled through Tom's contacts. My chest felt tight, my pulse quickening with every passing second. Sarah was still out there, somewhere, and now it was clearer than ever that she was in real danger. I tried to piece together everything Tom had said before the men took him. He claimed he hadn't hurt Sarah, but his words didn't sit right with me. He'd admitted to setting me up and leaving her at the cottage. What if the people after him had taken her? Kevin suddenly broke the silence. I found something, he said, his voice tense. One of Tom's recent calls was to a storage facility on the edge of town. He called them 3 times in the last 48 hours. A storage facility? I frowned. Why would he be calling a storage unit? Kevin shook his head. No idea, but it's worth checking out. Maybe he stashed something there. Evidence, money, or even Sarah. I didn't wait to hear more. I hit the gas, the tires squealing as we sped toward the storage facility. The storage unit. The facility was a grim, windowless building surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Rows of storage units stretched into the darkness, their steel doors reflecting the flickering light from the single security lamp in the lot. Kevin and I parked just outside the entrance and made our way toward the row Tom's phone had led us to. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified in the eerie stillness. Unit 317. This is it, Kevin said, stopping in front of the door. I reached out and tried the handle. Locked. Step back, Kevin said, pulling a crowbar from his jacket. I didn't even bother asking where he'd gotten it. Right now, I just wanted answers. With a grunt, Kevin pried the door open, the lock snapping with a loud crack. We pushed the door up, revealing the dimly lit interior of the storage unit. The sight inside made my blood run cold. There were boxes piled against the walls, papers, cash, and several burner phones scattered across a table. But that wasn't what caught my attention. In the center of the room, bound to a chair with duct tape across her mouth, was Sarah. Her eyes went wide when she saw me, tears streaming down her face. I rushed to her side, ripping the tape away and cutting the ropes that held her wrists and ankles. "Jack!" she gasped, her voice barely audible. I thought I'd never see you again." I pulled her into my arms, my heart pounding with relief. "You're okay," I whispered. "You're safe now." But the moment of relief was short-lived. Sarah's story. We helped her to her feet, and she leaned against me, her legs trembling. "What happened?" I asked, my voice urgent. "How did you end up here?" Sarah took a shaky breath. "It was Tom," she said. "After you left for the cottage, he called me and begged me to meet him there. He said he was in trouble and needed my help. I didn't know what to do, so I went." Her voice cracked as she continued. "When I got there, everything was a mess. He said he was being followed, that he'd gotten involved with dangerous people. I tried to convince him to go to the police, but he wouldn't listen. Then, those men showed up." "They took you?" Kevin asked. Sarah nodded. "They grabbed me before I could get away. They said they'd hurt me if I didn't cooperate. They wanted me as leverage, something to keep Tom in line. But after things got too messy, they threw me in here and told me to wait. They said if Tom didn't show up by morning, they'd come back to finish the job." A chill ran down my spine. These weren't just criminals, they were ruthless. We'd gotten to Sarah just in time, but this wasn't over yet. "We have to get out of here," I said, wrapping my arm around her. "They could come back any minute." The final piece. As we moved toward the door, something caught my eye. A flash drive sitting on the table next to the burner phones. I grabbed it on instinct, tucking it into my pocket. Kevin frowned. "What's that?" "No idea," I said. "But if Tom was hiding it, it's probably important." We made our way back to the car, my eyes constantly scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The air felt heavy with the weight of what we'd just uncovered. Once we were back on the road, Kevin turned to me. We need to see what's on that drive. It could be the key to taking these guys down. I nodded, my grip tightening on the wheel. Let's go home. We'll figure it out there. The truth revealed. Back at the house, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. Files popped up on the screen, hundreds of them. Bank records, transaction histories, photos of meetings between Tom and some very powerful-looking men. But one file stood out. A video file labeled Insurance. I clicked on it, my heart in my throat. The video was grainy but clear enough to see Tom sitting across from a man in a dark suit. They were in a fancy office, papers spread out on the desk between them. "You're not going anywhere," the man said, his voice cold. "You owe us too much. If you try to run, we'll take everything from you, and I mean everything." Tom's face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "I just need more time," he pleaded. "I'll get the money. I swear." The video cut off abruptly, but the message was clear. This was leverage, proof that Tom had been in deep with some very dangerous people. Kevin let out a low whistle. "This could be enough to take them down," he said. I nodded, my mind racing. "First, we need to take this to the police. They need to know the truth." The next morning, the sun barely peeked over the horizon as we stood outside the police station. I clutched the flash drive in my hand like it was a lifeline, the last piece of the puzzle that could finally clear my name and expose the truth. Sarah was still shaken, her eyes darting nervously as she glanced around, but she held my hand tightly. Kevin stood beside us, his face grim. "This has to work," he said. "Once they see what's on that drive, they'll have no choice but to believe you." I nodded, my jaw clenched. "Let's finish this." We walked inside, and within minutes, Detective Harris was sitting across from us in a small conference room, his arms folded and his eyes sharp with suspicion. "You'd better have something good," he said, "because right now you're still at the top of our list." Without a word, I slid the flash drive across the table. Harris raised an eyebrow but plugged it into his laptop. The files loaded quickly, and as he scrolled through the evidence, his expression shifted from skepticism to shock. "What is this?" he muttered, his eyes narrowing as he opened the video file labeled Insurance. The room fell silent as the video played, the grainy footage revealing everything. Tom's desperate pleas, the threats from the man in the dark suit, the clear proof that Tom had been running a massive money laundering operation for some very dangerous people. When the video ended, Harris leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath. "This changes everything," he said, glancing at me. "If what's on this drive is legit, we're dealing with something much bigger than we thought. Organized crime, international money laundering. This could bring down some very powerful people." "Does that mean you believe me now?" I asked, my voice tense. Harris nodded slowly. "You're not off the hook yet, but this is a damn good start." The sting operation. Over the next few hours, the police swung into action, mobilizing resources and coordinating with federal agents. They were planning a sting operation to take down the organization behind Tom's disappearance. Meanwhile, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still in danger. The men who had taken Tom were ruthless. They wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone who got in their way. "I don't want you involved in this," I told Sarah as we sat in the waiting area. "It's too dangerous." "I'm not leaving you," she said firmly. "We're in this together." I nodded, my heart swelling with gratitude. No matter how much we had been through, she was still by my side. Hours passed, and then finally Harris returned, his face grim but determined. "We've got a location," he said. "A warehouse near the docks. We believe that's where they're holding Tom, and where the organization is operating out of." I tensed. "I'm coming with you." Harris hesitated. "Jack, this isn't a good idea." "I'm coming," I repeated. "He set me up. He tried to destroy my life. I need to be there when this ends." Harris studied me for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but stay behind us. Let us handle it." The showdown. The convoy of unmarked police cars rolled silently through the dark streets, their lights off as they approached the warehouse. My heart pounded in my chest, my palms sweaty as I gripped the door handle. The officers moved swiftly, surrounding the building and positioning themselves at every entrance. Harris gave the signal, and the doors burst open in a coordinated raid. Chaos erupted. Shouts echoed through the warehouse, the sound of heavy boots pounding on the concrete floor. I stayed close to Harris, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of Tom or the men who had taken him. Then I saw him. Tom was huddled in a corner, his face bruised and bloodied, his hands bound behind his back. One of the men from the docks stood over him, shouting orders into a phone. "Police!" Harris shouted. "Drop your weapon." The man spun around, his eyes wide with panic. For a moment, it looked like he might try to run, but then he dropped the phone and raised his hands. Officers swarmed in, handcuffing the man and securing the area. I rushed over to Tom, cutting the ropes that bound his wrists. "Jack," he whispered, his voice hoarse. You found me." "Yeah," I said, helping him to his feet. "But you've got a lot of explaining to do." Tom managed a weak smile. "Fair enough." The aftermath. The days that followed were a whirlwind of police reports, interviews, and court proceedings. The evidence on the flash drive was enough to bring down the entire operation, and the men responsible for Tom's disappearance were facing serious prison time. Tom cooperated with the authorities, trading information for a reduced sentence. He'd made mistakes, big ones, but at least he was alive. As for Sarah and me, we were left to pick up the pieces of our lives. It wasn't easy. The betrayal still stung, and trust didn't come back overnight. But we were determined to rebuild one step at a time. One evening, as we sat on the back porch, watching the sunset, Sarah took my hand. "We've been through hell," she said softly, "but we made it. Together." I squeezed her hand, a faint smile tugging at my lips. "Yeah," I said, "we did." And for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed it. Thank you very much for listening to this story to the end. I hope you liked. We work for you, looking for and telling you the most effective stories about women's betrayal, shocking intrigue, interweaving the plot and unexpected reactions of angry men. Save us, put likes, write comments, and, of course, subscribe to the channel to not miss any story.